Dr. Dykes is a leading medieval astrologer and translator who earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of Illinois. He earned his medieval astrology qualification from the great Robert Zoller, and he taught philosophy courses at the universities in Illinois and Minnesota. In 2007, he published the 13th century astrologer Guido Bonatti's complete book of astronomy, an encyclopedic work, and since then he's translated and published numerous traditional works on nativities, horary questions, and elections. For more information about Dr. Benjamin Dykes, please visit his website at bendykes.com, and that is Dykes, bendykes.com. Good evening, Dr. Dykes. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we're very, very grateful to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started. What everybody asks me is, what are the Time Lords? So maybe you can enlighten us. What are the Time Lords that we keep talking about?
Well, a Time Lord is normally a planet, but it can also be a sign. But let's think of it as a planet. It's a planet that has some kind of management authority over your life for a certain amount of time. There are different Time Lord systems for different topics, and some of them are, the length of time is based on the latitude of your birth and other things. The main thing about Time Lords is that instead of, like, let's say with transits where you're looking for a specific day or a specific week for some event to happen, the idea behind Time Lords is that your life is divided up into intelligible episodes or chapters, like a biography, so that you move from one chapter to another. Whereas in a lot of predictive techniques, like transits, for example, there might be long periods of time when nothing is happening. So a Time Lord is a way of giving a kind of narrative quality to different chapters of life.
I apologize, Dr. Dykes. I had a bit of a technical glitch going on there.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you, because there are so many different Time Lord systems, do we go astray if we think of these Time Lords in terms of being entities or spirits? Is this wrong to think of them that way?
It depends. I don't think you should think of them as having personalities as such. Although if you have a kind of spiritual or magical practice, it makes sense that if you, let's say, were in a Jupiter period, if Jupiter was your Time Lord, that you might do ritual or meditations where you maybe do devotional things involving Jupiter, drawing on Jupiterian energy. There were ideas that the planets were, in a sense, driven by angelic powers, spiritual forces. And if you want to go back to people like Plato, people like Plato would say that there are spiritual beings sort of beyond the material world, and the planets are the physical representations of them. So there is a background for thinking of planets and planetary energies that way, which, you know, could be useful for spiritual practice.
The Hindu astrologers, they've been working with Time Lords for a very long time. A lot of we Westerners, we're surprised when we learn about them. We've never heard about them before. But the Hindus have been using them for quite some time. Do they see their Time Lords in a more spiritual context in this way, would you think, Dr. Dykes?
You mean would the Indians think that way?
Yes, sir. I realize this isn't your specialty, but I'm just curious if you know whether...
My understanding is that they probably do, and there's a much more developed tradition of using gems and precious stones and metals and things like that to align yourself with planetary energies. I think there's been a long tradition of that in the West too. The issue, though, is that the people who wrote the textbooks on how to read charts weren't necessarily the ones who were writing the books about the gems and metals and things. So we do have some of that, but you'll usually find that in the occult and esoteric books, not in the astrology manuals. But it is still there. Ancient people talked about, you know, if you're having a problem with Venus, then you wear this kind of ring and burn this kind of incense. So that is there, but it usually isn't in the chart reading manuals.
The Persian astrologers of ancient times, they used a system of Time Lords, which you have articulated in your many books, called the Firdaria. I'm very attracted to this because it's, I hate to say simple, but would you mind perhaps discussing a little bit about the Firdaria and especially how it's calculated?
Sure. The word seems to be a Persian version of the Greek word periodos, which just means a period. And so we think that's where the word came from. I think it probably also had some Indian influence because unlike all of the other Greek Time Lord systems we know, the Firdaria use the nodes, which the Indians also do. The Indians emphasize the nodes a lot. So there was probably some Indian origins there too. The idea is basically this, that you first need to know whether or not you were born by day or by night. So if the sun is above the horizon in your natal chart, then you have a diurnal or day chart. And if it's not, if he's below the horizon, then you have the night chart. If you were born during the day then your first Time Lord in life is going to be the sun, starting at birth. And he rules your life for 10 years. And then what they do is they go to the next planet in order, the so-called Chaldean order or order of speed. So your next Time Lord will be Venus for 8 years, then Mercury for 13, and the Moon for 9, and then it starts again up at the top with Saturn. And each of these periods is then subdivided so that each Time Lord, for a certain amount of time, then partners with the others. So, for example, in a diurnal chart, you'll start with the Sun period, then you'll have the Sun-Venus, Sun-Mercury, Sun-Moon, Sun-Saturn. All of that takes place during the broader Sun period of 10 years. And the skill is in interpreting what the Sun and the other planets are doing in your chart. So all diurnal people have the same general series, but what that means for you depends upon what is going on in your chart. If you were born at night, the series is the same. You just start with the Moon, and then you move to Saturn and Jupiter and so on. So it's a way of dividing life into intelligible periods of certain lengths, but the actual meaning and the contours of your life will be largely dictated by what those planets are doing in your chart. But it does mean, for example, that someone who was born at night will encounter Saturnian things earlier in life because Saturn becomes a Time Lord earlier in life, whereas someone born by day has Saturn after many, many years. And so you might think that just like we talk about people and their Saturn returns, diurnal people might have Saturn issues that are different from the Saturn issues of lunar or nocturnal people.
So just to make sure we're understanding correctly, if I'm born in the daytime, then I will enter my Saturn chapter at a relatively young age. And depending on Saturn's condition in my birth chart, the things that Saturn promises, these things have a chance of happening during the quote-unquote Saturn chapter in my life.
Right. Saturn will always be one of these partnering or sublords during a smaller period. He's going to be part of the sub periods, but he won't rule a major period until much later if you're a diurnal birth. Whereas in a nocturnal birth, he's a Time Lord much soon. He's the major Time Lord much sooner.
This is very interesting because a lot of people, as you well know, Dr. Dykes, they would love to learn more about their astrology, but they don't know their birth time. So this would be a good technique for those who have to ballpark their birth times, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. And I think it's, although I don't use it very much, one thing that might make it appeal to people is that people are often really they're really in tune with what their sun means and what their moon means, and all the symbolism of night and day, darkness and light, the conscious and the unconscious, and dividing life according to solar people and lunar people, I think would fit in well with what many of your listeners are already interested in.
I think so too. When I first learned about the Firdaria, I was just sort of floored at its simplicity, especially when I began to apply it to other charts. Very interesting stuff. There's another system of Time Lord rulerships that is also fairly simple but difficult to explain. You explain all of this brilliantly in your book, Traditional Astrology for Today, which I highly recommend, by the way. But I'm talking about the system of profections. Would you please define profections, if you could, Dr. Dykes?
Yep, profections are very old, and they, for a lot of astrologers, were really a bread and butter technique. I know it is for me when I do readings. The word profection comes from a Latin word. It means to move forward or set out on a journey. And the idea is that you can do this with any house or any planet in the chart, but usually it's the ascendant, the rising sign. And what we do is we say that at birth, your ascendant is, so to speak, on itself at age 0. When you're born, you are age 0. And it stays there for 1 year. When you turn 1 year old, the ascendant advances and becomes your natal second house at age 1. Then at age 2, it advances, and we treat your third house as an ascendant. And we go around the chart again and again like this. And the idea is that your life takes on the themes of each of these houses in order. It goes through a cyclical process, and for any year of your life will be partly about that house that you land on, whatever age that happens to be, whatever house that is. And then any planets in that house will further color the year, its qualities, its emotions, its events. The houses they rule will be brought into that sign of the year. And then there's a planet called the Lord of the Year, which is the planet that rules that sign. So, for example, let's suppose that you are age 46, and everyone at age 46 comes to the 11th house, just because that's how the counting works. And let's suppose that your 11th house is Scorpio, which traditionally is ruled by Mars. And what that means is that for this year, your life, because we're perfecting the ascendant, your life is going to be about 11th house matters, friendships, hopes, that sort of thing. And the Lord of the Year, the planet that manages those affairs, is Mars. So suppose that your Mars is in the 9th. Well, that means this year, the year is about 11th house things. It's about Scorpio things. And because Mars rules it, there's going to be martial activity, and it'll be related to the 9th house. So we might say you make friends with some foreigners. Or maybe there are some ventures that you have great hopes for, and they're going to be connected with 9th house issues like religion or foreigners. So this is a really useful thing, and it's extremely accurate. And one of the benefits of it is this is used along with other techniques to help you screen out some of the noise in the chart. We all have that experience of looking at the chart, and there's all of these lines and all of these symbols, and you can easily get lost. But if you know that your Time Lord for this year is this one particular planet, it gives you something to focus on, and that can really help your reading be stronger.
I learned that from your Persian trilogies in the installment by Abu Ma'ashar, where you gave us a lot of tips to help us separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were. And you referred to perfections as the bread and butter technique. So in your experience, it has great power to describe what will happen in a native's life over a course of a year or so.
Absolutely. I think if anyone wants to learn any predictive technique in traditional astrology, or even if you do modern astrology, learn profections, and you will be amazed. You learn profections with the traditional house meanings, and you will be amazed how your life repeats itself,
well,
and how accurate it is.
The thing that amazes me about profections, Dr. Dykes, is that they seem to operate almost totally liberated of transits. It's almost as if it's a permutation of the chart itself. That's what, and we can apparently do these over months and days as well, can't we, Dr. Dykes?
Yeah, there are people who break. For example, in that example of the age 46 coming to the 11th house. Then what some people do, and ancient folks describe this. You break down the year into 12 months, each of which involves a profection. So Scorpio would not only be age 46 itself, but it would also be the first month of age 46. And then the next sign would be the second month of age 46. So that you get, I don't know if fractals are the right way to look at it, but you get this patterning where you get a zodiac within a zodiac within a zodiac for a specific amount of time. Get these permutations, like you said.
Amazing. We'll talk about the philosophy behind that a little bit later in the interview. What I want to ask you now is, do we use topical houses for this, Dr. Dykes, or should we begin our profections from the axial degree of the ascendant?
Well, I use whole sign houses, and I'm not sure if your audience has heard of those before, so maybe I'll just explain it very quickly.
Okay.
Whole sign houses simply mean that the sign itself is the house. Because anciently, each sign was called the house or domicile of a particular planet. So Scorpio is the house of Mars, they would say. And what this means is that if your ascendant falls, let's say, on Gemini, then all of Gemini, both the parts above the axial degree and below it, everything in Gemini is the first house because it's the first sign. And then everything in Cancer would be the second house because Cancer is the second sign. So if you read houses using whole sign houses, which was very ancient, you can do profections using whole sign houses. Some people use their normal Placidus houses or Regiomontanus, and they count those houses. Other people do them in 30-degree increments from the ascendant. But the oldest way is to use whole sign houses, and that's the one that I do.
Okay. This is very extremely. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of stuff. I want to remind everyone that you can find traditional astrology for today at bendykes.com, and it'll bring you up to speed on all of this without a doubt. But the Time Lord that we identify with the profection, the Lord of the Year. How important is the Lord of the Year in determining events that might happen to us or people that we might meet? How does the Lord of the Year rank, for example, when compared to the Firdaria Time Lord and other Time Lords? I think we're talking about a hierarchy of Time Lords here. What rank is the profection?
Well, the Lord of the Year is extremely important, and since profections were a primary Time Lord technique, I would say you would always want to pay attention to the Lord of the Year. For one thing, if the Lord of the Year is in some other house, it's the first indication of what other areas of life the year will be connected with. If you use transits, you would want to pay attention to the transits of that Lord of the Year. So that Lord of the Year's behavior over the year will matter. Other planets' transits to the natal position of the Lord of the Year will give some timing. But so it is very important. And Abu Mashar gives some indications that, see, what they did was there was a kind of hierarchy of techniques, and there was something called distributions that was generally considered to be the most high level at the top. Then below that was profections and solar returns, and below that transits. So transits were more like triggers of the other techniques. The Fradaria were treated a bit separately, I guess because they arose separately. So, for example, Ptolemy talks about transits and solar well, not so much solar returns, profections, distributions. He has another technique too. But these Fradaria arose separately from the Persians, and it's hard to know exactly how to integrate them. Mm-hmm. One way to do it could be this. Suppose that you are in a 8-year Venus period. Venus rules 8 years of the Fradaria. So for 8 years, Venus is this main Fradaria lord. Well, you might want to track your profections, because if at some point during those 8 years your profections come to a house ruled by Venus, now you've got two techniques saying that now she is the Time Lord. So it might be that during those 8 years that you're waiting, wondering what Venus, what this Time Lord is about, that the things will become more intensified during that particular year, that the profections also show Venus. So you get broader and narrower periods with the same Time Lord. It intensifies the effect.
Would you say that the Lord? Is it safe to say that the Lord of the Year is almost like a symbolic surrogate of the native, the individual, and that, or is that incorrect to say?
No, that's good. I mean, it's the Lord of the whole year, so it's not just the Lord of the person. But what we're doing by profection is we are profecting the ascendant, and classically, the ascendant is you. So it's almost like the planets are taking turns managing your life, and the system of rulerships is sort of a preordained way in which they, or God, the divine mind, has sort of ordained that planets will cooperate in this order. So they're taking turns, and in fact, that's what some of the Latin translators translated it as. They were taking their turn at ruling a period of life.
Huh. Well, we've talked a lot about how individuals are influenced by these Time Lords. There is some mention in the literature for Time Lords influencing collectives, like nations and things of that nature. And I wanted to perhaps get your thoughts about this. Are Time Lords specifically for the individuals, or would a collective, like a company or a nation even, or some other collective, also be influenced by Time Lords?
Seems to me you could also do, well, and they did, do mundane profections. They certainly used mundane profections. And what they were often interested in was how events were embedded in the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions that happen almost every 20 years. And so what they did was they tried to correlate events on Earth with certain kinds of conjunctions and certain kinds of signs. And when you had a conjunction, for example, let's say there was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, there was a certain time they would cast the chart for, and then they would do mundane profections from Gemini for the next 20 years, because that's how long the conjunction period lasts. And then they would try to interpret what was going on in the nation at that time. So maybe if the profection came to the 8th house of the chart they had, it was a dangerous time for the nation. Or maybe financial concerns would be really important if it came to the 2nd house. So that's the kind of thing that they would do. That was really done by the Persians, so far as we know. The older Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, they didn't do those mundane profections. But all of a sudden, with the Arabic translations that appeared in the 700s, all of these techniques appeared fully formed. brought over to Baghdad by Persian astrologers. So they were taking natal techniques and applying them in this new kind of mundane astrology.
Very interesting. Dr. Dykes, we're going to take a 1-minute break here in a little bit. And when we get back, I would like to ask you about some of the philosophy behind the system of Time Lords. We'd like to remind everyone that you can find Dr. Dykes at bendykes.com. We will be right back in 1 minute.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
Welcome back to the Psychic Viewpoint. We have here Dr. Benjamin Dykes, philosopher, translator, scholar, astrologer, and a whole lot more from bendykes.com. Well, Dr. Dykes, so far we've been talking about, we've been defining what Time Lords are and discussing some of the different systems. But people have to be asking themselves right now, where do I fit into all of that? I thought that I was the sheriff in Stephen County, and now all of a sudden I'm a donkey following a carrot on a stick. Even the president, where's my free will?
Mm-hmm. Let's deal with the free will issue really quickly, and then maybe we can look at some of the bigger picture. Traditional astrology, when we look at things like Time Lords, for example, and I say that Venus rules your life for a certain amount of time, it uses what I call a determinism of types. That is to say, the chart can't tell you every single detail about what's going on, but it can only tell you the types of things that are happening and the types of things that will go on. How you handle that and how you can steer that is up to you. Now, not everything is in our control. Lots of things aren't in our control. But the chart, for example, can't tell me how many times I'm going to chew some food or how many steps it takes to the mailbox or anything like that. And there's lots of leeway when I say Venus is going to rule your life for the next 6 years. Well, a lot can happen in 6 years. There are a lot of choices that you can make in 6 years. Nevertheless, the period will be Venusian. So this doesn't take away from our ability to choose at all. So I guess that's the first thing I want to say. But it is humbling to know that we are part of a bigger, intelligible picture. So there is something humbling about it as well. I think one way to understand some of the ancient attitudes towards this material comes from Plato. And the idea in Plato is that our changeable material world, where we live our lives, has a kind of substructure to it, an eternal substructure made of these special eternal entities, which sometimes he called forms, sometimes he called ideas. And if you like, some of the Platonists identified this structure with the mind of God, or the divine mind, so that we live in time, we live in a world of change, we live in a world of life and death. All of that is contained eternally, so to speak, in the intelligible divine mind. what we do in astrology when we cast, let's say, a birth chart is we are getting a time slice. We're getting a time-based representation of something that is eternally in God's mind, or in this cosmic mind. What astrology does is it's a way that the divine mind uses to communicate to us what is going on and what our lives are about. So the astrology is a kind of communication, and in fact, Plato talks about how the configurations of the stars are a way that the divine soul speaks to us. So one way to look at astrology is it is a communication about our who we are, where we fit into the universe, where we fit into the divine mind generally, and also what things are really possible for us given the fact that we live in this world of change and so on.
Well, it seems, I tell you what's humbling for me, Dr. Dykes, is this notion that by being born, I've stumbled into some sort of divine automation system. You know, that instead of, the divine mind, I used to think that until I read your books, Dr. Dykes, I used to think that the divine mind, woke up every day and said, well, I wonder what Stephen Lewis is doing. Let me check up on Stephen. And here it come to find out, the divine mind can influence me in a number of ways without even thinking about me. I wanted to get your thoughts about these systems of Time Lords in terms of perhaps this being some sort of an automated system for the divine mind. I just wanted to get your opinion about that idea.
Well, to go back to Plato for a minute, what Plato describes in this book of his called the Timaeus, it's his book about the creation of the universe. It's a very late book, and it's the one where he talks about each one of us having a planetary angel and the divine soul communicating to us. All of this stuff is included in that book. And what he says is that one of the purposes of this world of forms and inserting this kind of orderliness into the world is that it makes life intelligible. And to say that the world is kind of like this automated system, that was the phrase that you used, you could take that in a bad way. We're just in this automated machine. But what Plato was saying is that by introducing this kind of intelligible, meaningful order, including through astrology, it benefits us because it gives us the benefit of knowledge and self-knowledge. And that is a good thing. So, I'm not sure if that answers your question. That's the Platonist view of things. But it means that you are being invited through astrology to participate in the life that this intelligible order or God's mind has introduced into the world. There are limitations on what each of us can do, simply because we live in a world of time and matter, but we're being invited to participate with that mind and consciously be happy through our own self-knowledge and deliberate choices. So it's a kind of invitation for Plato.
Fair enough. That's a very helpful way of looking at it, for sure. I want to ask you now, Dr. Dykes, about hostile changeovers. Abu Mashar wrote at length about that, and you translated his thoughts as far as what happens when we have a chain of hostile or malefic planets or Time Lords that are handing over rulership for the period of time. Now, my question to you is, as a practicing astrologer, I see clients and I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, they're going through several different time, for the next 27 years, they're going to have malefic Time Lords. What do we tell the client? What do we do in situations like that? How do we make the best out of that situation?
Well, the first thing to remember is that when you have a client, you shouldn't be shy about recognizing problems that they're already having or have had in the past. Usually, because there's so many people want to stick to the positive, that many clients feel despair because no one's recognizing the real problems that they're having. Right. So we shouldn't be afraid to address these issues. Secondly, malefic planets and malefic configurations, sometimes there's nothing you can do about them. But sometimes malefics can give us, can be beneficial to us. They can be helpful. They can give us leadership qualities, especially if we decide to personally take charge of those malefics in our lives. Again, we can't control everything. But if you are having a martial period and the response should not be to hide quivering in your room. The response should be to address issues of anger in your life, formulate a plan, be honest with yourself about risks that you take, so that it will be a martial period, but you are not a victim, and you certainly don't have to be a victim. Your life happens because you're the one living it. So sometimes we do have to give bad news. But I'll tell you, if I could, an example of a client of mine where at first I thought, oh, geez, what am I going to tell him? Because what I found was I think 6 of his planets were in detriment or fall, which is a bad condition to be in. Although he had some receptions between them that kind of mitigated that. And when a planet is in dissension or fall or detriment, it often means that things don't work out the way that you want, you don't get recognition, or ventures that you enter into kind of fall apart or take a lot of work to keep together. So I was looking at a chart that just said disintegration all over the place. So I was thinking about what to say to him. And he said that he was in a job, successful job, but it involved him traveling all over the world. And he would have short contracts of maybe 2 years in this place, then he would move to another country, worked for 1 year, and so on. But he was worried because of all these planets in detriment and fall. That meant change. So he was calling me up worried. And I said, well, but do you like this job? Do you like the change that it gives you? And he says, actually, I love it. I said, well, then this is not a problem. The chart is describing that things don't last long and there will be lots of change. But if you're the kind of person who can handle that, then this chart is something that works very well for you, even though detriment and fall are normally bad things for most people. So some of it involves asking the person what they really want, and you might find out that a malefic planet or some planet in detriment is not really contrary to the kinds of things they want.
One of the reasons why I like to promote your work so much and encourage people to read your books is because it leads one to other translators and other philosophers like James Holden and Robert Schmidt, etc. And in doing that, I learned about this relationship between matter and form, what the translators called Hule and Idon. Or IDOS. Mm-hmm. I just remember the word. And so I wanted to ask you, Dr. Dykes, if there's a way we could leverage this, because allow me to recount the idea. Let's say we have a system like the Firdaria where Saturn could be ruling a larger period and he'll have a sub-period ruler. The idea being that the matter of Saturn is offered up to take the form of the sub-period ruler. So I wanted to get your idea about this. Let's say we have a very challenging period that we have to get through. Is there any way, let's say we have a Mars as the major Time Lord, and is there any way we can take the negative matter and find some positive form to offer it up to another Time Lord, for example, like with the Firdaria, if that makes sense? It's a rather complicated concept. You see where I'm going with this?
No, it makes sense. Now, they did not use that language, but it can be a helpful thing. If a major Time Lord is like a kind of flexible matter or a general theme, That word eidos is actually Plato's word for form or idea, and you could think of it as structure. So if you have a Saturn period, that has general qualities that will describe the period, but it gets structured different ways and becomes specified through the various sublords. So that is a useful way to think about it. So you might have a Saturn period that has certain general qualities that we know from what Saturn means, but it takes on martial events or involves martial people, or Venusian people and Venusian events. I think to find the best periods is sometimes a matter of finding which planets fit really well together, like Jupiter and the Sun fit really well together. Saturn is a little more tricky, but again, this is where we have to go beyond the generic structure that all diurnal people or all lunar people have, and looking at what your chart means. I can think of a specific example. Saturn Mars. This is in a different technique, but it works very similar. Saturn was the main Time Lord. Mars was the sublord, or what they call the partnering lord. And so, because Saturn is the general Time Lord, it shows being alone, gloomy, maybe impoverished, hardworking, all of this kind of thing. Right. Well, during that Mars period, Mars was this sublord or partnering lord. He was in graduate school, and he was alone a lot of the time, working hard, all of these Saturnian things. And he found that because Mars is a travel planet, anciently, he found that people were coming in and out of his life all of the time. There was lots of change and fluctuation. And that was hard. However, Mars was the lord of his ascendant and was in the 10th house, which is that's a situation that shows great ambition. Mm-hmm. And so even though he was lonely, and even though people were moving in and out of his life and he was working hard, he was building a career that he was able to use later. And all that time, he knew that he was fulfilling his ambitions. So if we just looked at Saturn and Mars by themselves, we might think, oh man, this is awful. But if Mars is doing something really important and good in your chart, then mixed with those difficulties will be something very valuable.
Right. That's what makes it all worthwhile.
Pardon?
Oh, that's what makes it all worthwhile, I would imagine. It would be
helping people recognize that too. Which is another interesting feature of Time Lords, that they have expiration dates.
Well, you know what, Dr. Dykes, out of all the authors and notable scholars on this material, you seem to be the most sympathetic toward modern astrologers, and you seem very welcoming to them. Let's say that a modern astrologer or someone trained in modern techniques is listening to this material. What might you say to them to sort of ease them into this? For example, is there any way to fit the outer planets into these Time Lord schemes in any way? That sort of thing.
Into the Time Lord schemes, I don't think so. Simply because they are based on principles of rulership that the outer planets don't fit into. I do know that some of my traditional friends who are professionals do use the outer planets, but they really restrict what they can do. For example, they won't let Uranus rule Aquarius. He has no rulership there. Instead, Uranus becomes kind of like a fast-moving fixed star. So, for example, if Uranus is in the 11th, that doesn't mean anything. But if Uranus was on the cusp of the 11th, well, that would mean something. So they give the outer planets really tight orbs and no rulerships. So we kind of restrict their meanings. And Actually, I think one of the best pieces of advice that any curious modern person could try out is take 6 months and take the outer planets out of all the charts that you cast. And for many people, that's very scary. So, all right, try it for 3 months. You can put them back when you're done. But I promise you that you will suddenly become reacquainted with planetary meanings and house rulerships that normally an addiction to the outer planets completely obscures.
Yeah, I agree. I tried it, and it was easy to break my addiction to the outer planets. And now that I come back to study them, I learn a lot more about them. But as we come into the end of our interview here, Dr. Dykes, I wanted to ask you what you have on your schedule these days. For example, are you accepting clients these days, or does your schedule permit it? Not permit it, rather.
I'm going to start taking clients again in 2015. I needed to take some time off to finish some projects, but I'll start taking them again in 2015. And in 2015, I'm going to start releasing my Arabic series along with some other things. I have a whole series of Arabic manuscripts that I'm working on. And hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll also see a new book from Greek, the existing works of Theophilus of Edessa, who was really the last Greek-speaking astrologer, and he died in the 700s. So he represents the end of the tradition and the transition over to the Arabs in a certain sense. And he wrote on military astrology.
Your reach into this field is... your reach into this field is absolutely amazing and comprehensive. I marvel at your ability to translate the Latin, and also the Arabic had to have been quite difficult. In reading over this literature, I had to hazard a guess, which tradition would you say offers the richest body of lore dealing with Time Lords? Or are they all equal in that regard, would you say?
I guess I want to say the Arabic period. So we're talking about, the Arabic period and early medieval period, because the early medievals were translating the Arabs. There's all sorts of Time Lord material in Vedius Valens, an ancient Greek writer. He has a huge book with Time Lord systems that we don't even quite understand, much less not having tried them. But he was only one author, and he was not very influential on the rest of the tradition. So if people want to learn about Time Lords, the people who talk about them the most are the Arabs and Persians and early medieval Latins.
Let me ask you real quickly, Dr. Dykes, is there any application for perfections in Time Lord systems in horary astrology, purely divinatory, asking a question astrology? Am I going to get this money, or am I going to get this person, etc.?
I can't think offhand of anyone using profections for that. Usually what they do is they look at transits, or they look at the number of degrees between two planets, and they turn that into a number, into a unit of time. I can't think of seeing profections in a horary chart, but I'm sure someone's done it.
Wow, Dr. Dykes, we have covered an amazing amount of material this evening. You have expressed some very complicated ideas quite lucidly and cogently. We can find you at bendykes.com. We can pick up all your books from there, right? You also have a Logos and Light lecture series that I think people might be interested in. And also, if you're interested in this material and find it a little mind-boggling, I highly recommend Traditional Astrology for Today, which is extremely illuminating, both as to the technical ends of what we're talking about and also dealing with the philosophy behind it. So please elaborate a little bit more, Dr. Dykes. How can we get your books? How can we contact you if we need you, etc.?
You can find my books on Amazon. You can also go to bendykes.com. I have a lot of audio workshops, audio lectures, and my email is also on my webpage. If I could just say one quick word about traditional astrology for today, because you've mentioned that. It's a short book of about 100 to 125 pages, and I specifically designed it for curious modern people who just want to get their toes wet, who don't want to have to make a big financial or time commitment to learn a little bit more what is all this traditional stuff about and why are people excited about it. So that would be a good place to start if you're just curious and want to see what's going on. I think the longest chapter is maybe 5 pages, and I designed it that way, and I would recommend that as a starting place.
Let me just add that I've been studying astrology for quite a bit, and I continually go back to, and I've reread traditional astrology for today. So it has a lot to offer both the beginner and someone who's not a beginner. Well, Dr. Dykes, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Hey, happy holidays to you, Dr. Dykes. We'll chat with you later.
You too. Sounds good. Bye.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers. Get access. Psychic access. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.